I never thought the place where I'd been fighting for my life would become the place where I'd finally find the strength to fight for my dignity. Lying in that hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped constantly, I discovered that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't money or influence. It's the courage to say enough. What happened in room 247 changed everything, and I'm about to tell you exactly how a folder full of legal documents became my shield against 30 years of manipulation and disrespect. My name is Margaret. I'm 73 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew what family meant. I thought I understood the unspoken rules that govern mothers, sons, and the women they marry. I was wrong about so many things, but I was especially wrong about my daughter-in-law, Patricia. I spent 3 decades trying to build bridges with a woman who was systematically planning to burn them all down. If you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever wondered if being kind and generous is actually making you weak, then this story is for you. Because sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who need to learn that respect isn't inherited, it's earned. It all started 42 years ago when my son David was born. He was my miracle baby, my only child, after years of trying and 3 heartbreaking miscarriages. His father, my husband Robert, died in a car accident when David was just 15. From that moment on, it was just the 2 of us against the world. I worked double shifts as a nurse to put him through college, sold my mother's jewelry to help him with his down payment on his first house, and I never, not once, made him feel guilty about the sacrifices I made. David grew up to be a successful architect, and I couldn't have been prouder. When he brought Patricia home at 26, I was thrilled. She was beautiful, educated, seemed ambitious. She had a degree in marketing and came from what she called old money, though I later learned that meant her family had lost most of their wealth decades ago and were living on memories and credit cards. From the very beginning, Patricia made it clear that she found my presence in David's life inconvenient. During their engagement dinner, she actually said to me, "I hope you understand that David and I will need our space as a married couple." I smiled and nodded, thinking she was just nervous about becoming part of our little family. I had no idea she was drawing battle lines. The wedding was the first real sign of what was coming. Patricia insisted on planning everything herself, which I respected. But when I offered to contribute financially, I had saved $15,000 specifically for David's wedding. She looked at me with this smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Oh, Margaret, that's so sweet, but we really want this to be our day, you know? We don't want anyone to feel like they bought their way into our special moment." David just stood there and said nothing. That should have been my first warning. After they married, the visits became less frequent. When I'd call David at home, Patricia would answer and tell me he was busy in the shower, taking a work call, always something. When they did visit, she'd spend the entire time talking about their renovations, their vacations, their plans, never asking about my health, my job, my life. I was a spectator in conversations about my own son's life. Then came the grandchildren. Emma was born first, followed by Joshua 3 years later. I was ecstatic. I dreamed of being a grandmother, of having little ones to spoil and love. But Patricia had other plans. She established visiting rules immediately. I could see the children on scheduled visits only, no dropping by unannounced. I couldn't give them gifts without clearing it with her first. I couldn't take them overnight to my house because, according to Patricia, they needed routine and consistency. When Emma started school, I offered to pick her up on the days Patricia was working late. "That's not necessary," Patricia said. "We have a very reliable babysitter. Besides, Emma is used to her, and we don't want to confuse her routine." I watched my own granddaughter treat me like a distant relative because I was only allowed to see her under Patricia's supervision, on Patricia's terms. The financial manipulation started slowly. David would mention needing money for this or that, Emma's private school tuition, Joshua's orthodontics, a new roof for their house. I helped because that's what mothers do. Over the years, I gave them nearly $60,000 in loans that were never repaid. Every time I brought up repayment, Patricia would get this wounded look and say something like, "I thought family was supposed to help each other without keeping score." But she was keeping score. Oh, she was definitely keeping score. When I turned 65 and retired from nursing, I decided to downsize from my 4-bedroom house to a smaller place. I had built up significant equity over the decades, and I planned to use some of the money to travel, maybe take a cruise, visit my sister in California, whom I hadn't seen in years. That's when Patricia's true colors really showed. She called me the day after I mentioned my downsizing plans and said, "Margaret, David and I have been talking, and we think it would be wonderful if you considered moving closer to us. There's a lovely senior community just 15 minutes away. It would be so nice to have you nearby to help with the children." The lovely senior community turned out to be an assisted living facility. Patricia had toured it and picked out a unit for me without consulting me at all. When I expressed surprise, I was 65 and completely independent, not 95 and needing assistance, she laughed and said, "Oh, I know you're not ready for assisted living now, but this place has different levels of care. You could start in independent living and then transition as needed. It's really quite practical." I declined, politely but firmly. I wanted to stay in my own community, near my friends, close to the hospital where I'd worked for 30 years. Patricia's response was to stop bringing the children to visit me. Suddenly, Emma and Joshua were always too busy with activities, playdates, sports. When I called to speak with them, they seemed distant, distracted. It took me months to realize that Patricia had been telling them that I was getting older and might not remember things correctly, and that they shouldn't upset Grandma with too much excitement. She was isolating me from my own grandchildren by painting me as frail and unstable. The breaking point came 2 years ago when David called to tell me they were planning to renovate their kitchen. The project was going to cost $40,000, and they were hoping I could help with a loan. I had helped them so many times before, but this time I hesitated. I was living on a fixed income. I'd already given them so much money, and honestly, I was tired of being treated like a bank that provided funds, but wasn't invited to board meetings. I told David I needed to think about it. Within an hour, Patricia called me herself. "Margaret," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I just wanted to talk to you about this kitchen situation. I know David asked you for help, and I want you to know that we really, really appreciate everything you've done for our family. But I also want you to understand that this isn't just about us. This renovation will increase the value of the house significantly, and since David is your heir, you're really investing in your own family's future." Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Besides, I know you want to make sure Emma and Joshua remember their grandmother as someone who was generous and supportive, not someone who," she trailed off. But the implication was clear. Pay up, or risk being remembered as selfish. I gave them the money. I hated myself for it, but I gave them the money. Over the next 2 years, the pattern continued. Patricia would find increasingly creative ways to ask for financial help while simultaneously undermining my relationship with David and the children. She started making comments about my driving. "Margaret, are you sure you should be driving at night? We worry about you," despite the fact that I'd never had an accident. She questioned my memory. "Oh, you told us that story already, remember?" Even when I hadn't. Most painfully, she began excluding me from family decisions while insisting that I fund them. When Emma wanted to take piano lessons, Patricia called to ask for money for the piano, but I found out about the recitals and progress from Facebook photos. When Joshua needed surgery to correct a minor foot problem, I was asked to help with medical bills, but wasn't told about the surgery until after it was over. I was being erased from my own family's life while being expected to bankroll it. The final straw came 6 months ago, during what was supposed to be a celebration dinner for Emma's 16th birthday. I had given Emma a beautiful gold necklace that had belonged to my mother, a family heirloom I'd been saving for this exact moment. Patricia looked at the necklace and said, "Oh, Margaret, this is lovely, but Emma's skin is really sensitive to certain metals. We'll probably need to have this tested before she can wear it regularly." Then she turned to Emma and said, "Sweetie, why don't you thank Grandma, and then we'll put this somewhere safe for later." Later. Always later with Patricia. Later, when Emma was older. Later, when the timing was better. Later, when Patricia decided I was worthy of being included in my own granddaughter's life. That night, I went home and did something I should have done years earlier. I called my lawyer, Harold Morrison, who had been handling my affairs since Robert died. I told him I wanted to revise my will. I wanted to make sure that when I died, my assets would go directly to Emma and Joshua in trust funds that Patricia couldn't touch, with Harold as the trustee. Harold listened patiently, and then said something that changed everything. "Margaret, given what you're telling me about this pattern of financial dependence and emotional manipulation, you might want to consider being more strategic about this. Have you ever thought about what would happen if you just stopped giving them money? Sometimes the most revealing thing you can do with someone is to see how they treat you when you're no longer useful to them. That conversation planted a seed that grew into a plan. 3 weeks ago, I started feeling dizzy and short of breath. At first, I attributed it to stress and the summer heat, but when I nearly fainted at the grocery store, my neighbor insisted on driving me to the emergency room. After a series of tests, Dr. Reyes told me I was experiencing some heart irregularities that required monitoring and possibly a procedure to correct. I was admitted to the hospital for observation and treatment. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 30 years working in hospitals, caring for other people's families, and now I was the patient in room 247, watching my own family's true nature reveal itself. David came to see me that first evening, and he seemed genuinely concerned. He held my hand, asked about my symptoms, wanted to know what the doctors had said. For a moment, I felt like I had my son back. Then Patricia arrived with the children, and the dynamic shifted immediately. "How are you feeling, Margaret?" Patricia asked, but she was already looking around the room, checking her phone, organizing things that didn't need organizing. Emma and Joshua dutifully kissed my cheek and then stood awkwardly by the window while Patricia dominated the conversation. "The timing of this is really unfortunate," Patricia said, as if my heart condition was an inconvenience I'd scheduled poorly. "We have Emma's college orientation next week, and Joshua has that summer basketball camp. David's going to have to rearrange his entire work schedule." She talked about my health scare like it was a traffic jam that was making everyone late for more important appointments. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. David would visit during lunch breaks, clearly worried but also clearly overwhelmed by Patricia's detailed instructions about what he needed to ask the doctors, what papers he needed to get, what decisions he needed to make in case something happens. Patricia herself would arrive with the children for brief, performative visits that felt more like photo opportunities than genuine concern. On the 4th day, Patricia came alone. She sat in the visitor's chair and pulled out a folder, the same way she might prepare for a business meeting. "Margaret," she said, "I've been thinking about this situation, and I realize we need to have a very practical conversation about your future. The doctors don't seem to think this current episode is life-threatening, which is wonderful news, but it's also a wake-up call." She opened her folder and pulled out several brochures. They were all for assisted living facilities. "David and I have been researching options, and we found some really excellent places that specialize in cardiac care for seniors. This one," she held up a glossy brochure, "has a wonderful staff-to-resident ratio, and they handle all the medication management, meals, transportation to doctor's appointments. It would take such a burden off David's shoulders." I stared at her, speechless. I was in the hospital for heart monitoring, not dementia. I was 73, not 93. I was temporarily unwell, not permanently incapacitated. "Patricia," I said carefully, "I appreciate your concern, but I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. The doctors haven't suggested that I need assisted living. I just need to manage my medications better, and maybe make some lifestyle changes." She smiled that smile again, the one that never reached her eyes. "Margaret, I know this is hard to accept, but you're not seeing the big picture. You live alone in a house that's too big for you. You're driving when maybe you shouldn't be. You're managing multiple medications. This episode could have been so much worse if your neighbor hadn't been there. What if next time there's no one around to help?" She leaned forward, and her voice took on that condescending tone I'd heard her use with the children when they were being unreasonable. "The truth is, you're becoming a responsibility that David isn't equipped to handle while also managing his career and our family. We love you, of course, but love sometimes means making hard decisions. These facilities are wonderful. You'd have built-in socialization, professional care, and David could visit regularly without worrying constantly about your safety." That's when I understood. This wasn't about my safety or my health. This was about control and convenience. Patricia wanted me warehoused, somewhere she could point to as evidence of her family devotion, while ensuring I was no longer a variable she had to manage. "What about my house?" I asked. "Well, obviously you'd need to sell it to pay for the care facility, but don't worry about that. David and I would handle all the paperwork and logistics. You wouldn't have to stress about any of those details. David and Patricia would handle the sale of my house, the house I'd lived in for 38 years, the house where I'd raised David, where Robert and I had planned our future, where I'd built a lifetime of memories. They would handle it." "I see," I said quietly. "I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this," Patricia said, clearly mistaking my shock for compliance. I've already scheduled tours at 3 facilities for next week. Once you're discharged, we can start the process." She stood up, gathering her brochures like a salesperson who'd just closed a deal. "Oh, and Margaret, I think it would be best if we didn't discuss this with Emma and Joshua until after we've made the arrangements. You know how emotional teenagers can get, and we don't want to upset them unnecessarily." She kissed my forehead, actually kissed my forehead like I was a child being put to bed, and left me alone with the realization that my daughter-in-law had just attempted to take control of the rest of my life. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw myself in some sterile facility, eating pre-planned meals, participating in scheduled activities, receiving visits from David and the children on Patricia's timeline and terms. I saw my beautiful house, the house where David had taken his first steps, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, where Robert had proposed to me, being sold to fund my imprisonment in a place I'd never chosen. And I realized that Harold had been right. I needed to see how my family treated me when I was no longer useful to them. Well, now I knew. The next morning, Dr. Reyes came to check on me and deliver what she called very encouraging news. My heart rhythm had stabilized, the medication adjustments were working well, and I could go home in 2 days. She wanted me to follow up with a cardiologist as an outpatient and make some dietary changes, but there was no reason I couldn't continue living independently. "You're actually in quite good health for someone your age," Dr. Reyes said. "This episode was more of a warning shot than a catastrophe. With proper management, you should have many more good years ahead of you. Many more good years. In my own home, making my own decisions, living my own life." When David arrived that evening, I told him what Dr. Reyes had said. He looked relieved and hugged me tightly. "I'm so glad, Mom. I was really scared for a while there." "David," I said, "we need to talk about what Patricia discussed with me yesterday." His face changed immediately, becoming guarded. "She mentioned that you two talked about some practical considerations for the future. She wants to put me in assisted living and sell my house. Mom, she's just worried about you. We all are, living alone at your age, especially with heart issues." "David, I'm 73, not 93. Dr. Reyes says I can live independently with proper medication management. Your wife is trying to institutionalize me for her convenience, not my safety. That's not fair. Patricia has been nothing but supportive of our family. She's thinking about what's best for everyone. What's best for everyone, or what's easiest for Patricia." David stood up, his face flushed with anger I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. "Mom, I can't believe you're being so ungrateful. Patricia has bent over backward to include you in our lives. She's planned visits, she's brought the kids to see you, she's helped coordinate your care during this hospital stay, and this is how you repay her? By accusing her of having ulterior motives, including me in your lives? David, when was the last time I was invited to a family dinner? When was the last time I was told about the children's school events before they happened? When was the last time I was asked for my opinion about anything affecting our family? You're being dramatic. Patricia always keeps you informed. Patricia keeps me informed the way someone might update a distant relative about major life events. I'm your mother, David. I'm Emma and Joshua's grandmother. I should be part of your lives, not a peripheral figure who gets scheduled visits and financial solicitations." David sat back down, but his posture was defensive. "Look, Mom, I know Patricia can be organized about things, but that's just her personality. She's trying to manage a lot. Her job, the kids, our household. She's not trying to hurt you. Then why does every interaction with her leave me feeling smaller and less important?" "Maybe," David said quietly, "it's because you're getting older and you're having trouble adjusting to not being the center of everyone's world anymore." The words hit me like a physical blow. My own son, the boy I'd raised alone, the man I'd supported and sacrificed for, had just suggested that my feelings of marginalization were the product of age-related selfishness. "I see," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, I didn't mean it like that. I just meant—" "I think you meant it exactly like that." David left that night without kissing me goodbye, and I spent the hours until dawn staring at the ceiling, processing the fact that somewhere along the way, I had lost my son to a woman who saw me as an obstacle to her perfect life. The next day was my last day in the hospital, and I had made a decision. When Patricia arrived for what she undoubtedly assumed would be a final discussion about arrangements, I was ready for her. She swept into the room like she owned it, carrying another folder and wearing the kind of smile that people wear when they're about to deliver news they think is good but that everyone else will hate. "Margaret, You look so much better today. David told me about your conversation with Dr. Reyes. Wonderful news about your prognosis. She sat down and opened her folder with the efficiency of someone who had mentally moved past the pleasantries and was ready to discuss business. I've confirmed the tours for next week. The first facility has an opening immediately, which is really quite lucky. I've also been in touch with a realtor who specializes in senior home sales. She says the market is excellent right now for your neighborhood. Patricia, I interrupted, I'm not moving to an assisted living facility. She looked up from her papers with surprise, as if a piece of furniture had suddenly voiced an opinion. Margaret, I know change is scary, but we've discussed this. It's really the most practical solution for everyone. It's the most practical solution for you, I said. It removes me from your equation, while making you look like a devoted daughter-in-law who sacrificed to care for her husband's aging mother. Her mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something cold and calculating flash across her face before the smile returned. I don't think you're being fair. David and I have spent considerable time and energy researching the best possible care for you. We're trying to help. You're trying to control. There's a difference. Patricia set down her papers and leaned back in her chair, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost all pretense of warmth. Margaret, I'm going to be very direct with you because I think we're past the point of dancing around this. You are 73 years old. You have a heart condition. You live alone in a house that's too big for you, in a neighborhood where your closest friend is an 80-year-old woman who can barely take care of herself. David is 42 years old with a demanding career, 2 teenage children, and a wife who also works full-time. We cannot spend our lives worrying about whether you've fallen down your stairs or forgotten to take your medication. She stood up and began pacing, and I realized I was seeing the real Patricia for the first time in 30 years. Furthermore, David has been supporting you financially for years. The money for Emma's school, Joshua's medical bills, our home renovations, that's all money that should have been going toward our children's college funds and our retirement savings. But instead, we've been subsidizing your lifestyle choices. I stared at her in amazement. The money I had given them, the $60,000 I had provided from my own savings, my own retirement funds, she was describing as David supporting me. Patricia, I think you have that backwards. I've been giving you money, not the other way around. She laughed, and it was a sound I'd never heard from her before, bitter and dismissive. Margaret, you gave us money, yes. But what do you think has been paying for your medical insurance supplements? Your property taxes when you were short last year? The repairs on your car? David has been quietly covering your expenses for the better part of a decade because he didn't want you to feel like a burden. I felt like I was falling. Everything she was saying was true. David had helped with those things, but she was presenting it as if I was a dependent child rather than a mother who had received occasional help from her son, the same son I had supported entirely on my own for years. Those were gifts, I said weakly. I never asked for that help, and David never presented it as loans. Of course he didn't, because that's the kind of man he is. But the truth is, Margaret, you've been a financial and emotional drain on our family for years, and now you're also becoming a safety risk that we're expected to manage. The assisted living facility isn't just about what's convenient for us. It's about accepting reality. She sat back down and picked up her papers, her voice returning to that business-like tone. So, here's what's going to happen. You're going to tour the facilities next week and choose one. David and I will handle the sale of your house and the transition of your belongings. You can keep whatever furniture fits in your new apartment, and we'll donate the rest. The proceeds from the house sale will cover your care costs, and once that money runs out, Medicaid will take over. She looked at me directly, and I saw 30 years of careful mask wearing fall away completely. And if you try to fight us on this, if you try to manipulate David with guilt trips about his poor mother being abandoned, I will make sure that Emma and Joshua understand exactly why their grandmother had to be placed in professional care. I'll tell them about the times you've been confused during our visits, about the medication mistakes, about the falls you've tried to hide from us. I've never been confused. I've never made medication mistakes. I've never fallen. Haven't you? Patricia smiled that terrible smile. David, tell your mother what you told me about finding her in the driveway last month, confused about where she'd put her car keys. I turned to look at David, who had apparently been standing in the doorway, listening to this entire conversation. His face was red, and he looked uncomfortable, but he didn't contradict her. Mom, You were standing outside looking lost. Your keys were in your hand, but you seemed disoriented. I was looking for my reading glasses. I'd left them on the dashboard, and I was trying to remember which car I'd taken to the store. I wasn't confused. I was just being absent-minded. See, Patricia said to David. She doesn't even remember it correctly. That's when I understood the depth of what Patricia had been doing. She hadn't just been isolating me from my family. She'd been systematically building a case for my incompetence. Every moment of normal human forgetfulness or confusion had been cataloged and reframed as evidence of mental decline. Every time I'd needed help with something, technology, paperwork, minor household repairs, had been presented to David as proof that I couldn't manage alone. David, I said, is this really what you think of me? That I'm a confused old woman who's become a burden on your family? David looked between Patricia and me, clearly uncomfortable, but also clearly aligned with his wife. Mom, I think you're having trouble accepting that you need help, and I think you're being unfair to Patricia, who has been trying to take care of you. Patricia stepped closer to my hospital bed, and when she spoke, her voice was low and calm and absolutely terrifying. You're not in charge anymore, Margaret. You don't get to make decisions about how this family operates. You don't get to guilt David into choosing between his mother and his wife. You don't get to disrupt our lives because you're too proud to accept help. She picked up her folder and moved toward the door. The tours are scheduled for Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday next week. David will pick you up each day. You'll choose a facility by the following Monday, and we'll begin the transition process immediately. She paused at the door and looked back at me. This conversation is over, Margaret. The decision has been made. That's when I reached for my bedside table and pulled out a folder of my own. The folder I'd been keeping next to me since yesterday, when I'd made a decision that would change everything. Actually, Patricia, I said, you're absolutely right about one thing. The decision has been made. I opened my folder and pulled out the revised will that Harold had brought me the previous evening, along with several other documents. Harold Morrison, my attorney, came to see me yesterday. We had a very interesting conversation about estate planning and family dynamics. It turns out that when you're planning to leave a substantial inheritance, it's important to make sure it goes to people who actually respect and care for you, rather than people who see you as an inconvenient obstacle. Patricia's face went completely white. Harold helped me understand something important. My house is worth approximately $450,000. I have another $200,000 in retirement accounts, savings, and investments. That's $650,000 that I had planned to leave to David and the grandchildren. I looked directly at Patricia as I continued. But as you so eloquently pointed out, I've been a financial drain on your family. I've been confused and disoriented. I've been manipulating David with guilt trips. Most importantly, according to you, I'm no longer in charge of my own life. I pulled out the new will and held it up so she could see it. So I've made some changes. David is no longer my primary beneficiary. In fact, David is no longer a beneficiary at all. David stepped forward, his face shocked. Mom, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that your wife just spent 20 minutes explaining to me why I'm incompetent, manipulative, and a burden on your family. I'm talking about the fact that you stood there and agreed with her. I'm talking about the fact that you both think you can force me into assisted living against my will and sell my house without my consent. I turned to Patricia, who looked like she was going to be sick. You said the decision has been made, Patricia. You're absolutely right. I've decided to leave my entire estate to Emma and Joshua in trust funds that will be managed by Harold Morrison and will become accessible to them when they turn 25. David gets nothing. You get nothing. And neither of you gets to make any decisions about my care, my living situation, or my assets. Patricia found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. You can't do that. David is your son. You can't just cut him out of your will because you're upset about a care facility. I'm not cutting him out because I'm upset about a care facility. I'm cutting him out because he's allowed his wife to treat me like an inconvenient piece of furniture for 30 years, and because when I needed him to stand up for me, he chose you instead. I turned to David, who looked like he'd been slapped. David, do you love me? Of course I love you, Mom. You're my mother. Do you respect me? He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Mom, this isn't about respect. This is about what's safe and practical. No, David. This is about the fact that you've allowed your wife to convince you that I'm incompetent, so that you wouldn't have to deal with the inconvenience of having an independent mother who might have opinions about how your family operates. I gathered all the documents back into my folder. Harold is coming to pick me up when I'm discharged tomorrow. I'll be going home to my house, where I'll be living independently with proper medical follow-up care. If you'd like to visit me as my son, who respects and loves me, you're welcome anytime. If you'd like to visit me as Patricia's husband, who sees me as a problem to be managed, you're not welcome at all. Patricia stepped forward, her mask completely gone now, her face twisted with rage. You spiteful old bitch. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. You'd really punish your own grandchildren because your feelings got hurt? I'm not punishing Emma and Joshua. I'm ensuring that they'll have money for college and their futures without it being filtered through parents who've demonstrated that they view family relationships as financial transactions. David won't let you do this, Patricia snarled. We'll contest the will. We'll prove that you're mentally incompetent. I smiled at her, and for the first time in years, it felt genuine. Good luck with that. Harold anticipated that possibility, which is why Dr. Reyes conducted a mental competency evaluation yesterday as part of my discharge planning. I passed with flying colors. It turns out that understanding exactly what my family thinks of me is actually a sign of perfect mental clarity. I looked at David one more time. Your father would be ashamed of what you've allowed to happen to our family. He would be ashamed of how you've treated your mother, and he would be furious at how you've let your wife isolate me from my grandchildren. David's eyes filled with tears, but his voice was still defensive. Mom, you're being extreme. We can work this out. We can talk about this. No, David, the time for talking was 30 years ago when Patricia started treating me like an intruder in your life. The time for talking was 20 years ago when she started making rules about when and how I could see my grandchildren. The time for talking was 10 years ago when you started asking me for money while simultaneously allowing her to undermine my relationship with Emma and Joshua. I pointed to the door. The time for talking is over. Harold will be here at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning to take me home. If either of you are still here when he arrives, I'll ask hospital security to remove you. Patricia grabbed David's arm and practically dragged him toward the door, but she turned back to deliver one final threat. You'll regret this, Margaret. When you're alone in that house with no one to help you, when something happens and David isn't there to save you, you'll remember this conversation and you'll regret it. Patricia, I said quietly, I've been alone for 30 years. The only thing I regret is that it took me this long to admit it. After they left, I sat in my hospital bed for a long time, looking out the window at the parking lot where I could see David and Patricia having what appeared to be a very heated argument next to their car. Eventually they drove away, and I was alone with the beeping of the monitors and the knowledge that I had just blown up my family. But here's the thing, it wasn't really my family anymore. Somewhere along the way, I had become a peripheral figure in my own son's life, a walking bank account that occasionally needed management. Patricia had been systematically erasing me for decades, and David had let her do it because it was easier than confronting his wife's cruelty. Harold arrived the next morning exactly at 10 o'clock, and I've never been happier to see anyone in my life. He helped me gather my belongings, handled my discharge paperwork, and drove me home to my beautiful house where I belonged. That was 3 weeks ago. David has called twice, both times to ask if I was ready to be reasonable about this situation. I told him that I was being perfectly reasonable. I was a 73-year-old woman with a manageable heart condition who was living independently in her own home and managing her own affairs. If he wanted to have a relationship with me as his mother, I was available. If he wanted to continue treating me as Patricia's problem to be solved, he could stay away. He chose to stay away. Emma called me last week. Apparently, Patricia had told her and Joshua that I was going through a difficult phase and that they should give Grandma some space while she works through her feelings. But Emma is 16 now, old enough to remember a time when our relationship was closer, and she wanted to know why she couldn't come visit me anymore. I told her the truth. I told her that her mother had decided I was too old and confused to be around the family, and that her father had agreed. I told her that I loved her and Joshua more than anything in the world, but that I wouldn't continue to accept scheduled, supervised visits that made me feel like a stranger in my own family's life. Emma was quiet for a long time, and then she said something that broke my heart and gave me hope at the same time. Grandma, you don't seem confused to me. You seem sad. Out of the mouths of babes. I told Emma that she and Joshua are welcome in my home anytime they want to visit, with or without their parents' permission. I told her about the trust funds I've set up for their futures, and I explained that I did it because I love them, not because I'm trying to hurt their parents. "But Grandma," she said, "what if Mom and Dad don't let us see you? Then when you turn 18, you'll have to make your own decisions about what kind of relationship you want with your grandmother. But Emma, I want you to know that no matter what happens, no matter what anyone tells you about me, I have loved you and your brother every single day of your lives, and I always will." She started crying then, and she said, "I love you too, Grandma. I'm sorry Mom is being mean to you." That conversation gave me more peace than 30 years of trying to appease Patricia ever had. I've been thinking a lot about family lately, what it means, what it should look like, what I'm willing to accept and what I'm not. I realize now that I spent decades trying to buy my way into my son's good graces and his wife's approval. I funded their lifestyle while accepting scraps of attention and affection. I let them make me feel grateful for the privilege of loving my own grandchildren. But here's what I've learned. You can't purchase respect, and you can't negotiate your way into being valued. Either people see your worth, or they don't. Either they want you in their lives because they love you, or they want you there because you're useful to them. If you're watching this and you're nodding along, if you recognize yourself in my story, I want you to know something important. It's never too late to stand up for yourself. It's never too late to say enough. It's never too late to choose dignity over desperation. People will tell you that family is everything, that you should forgive anything, endure anything, accept anything because they're family. But being related to someone doesn't give them the right to treat you poorly. Love without respect isn't love. It's exploitation, wearing a prettier name. Since that day in the hospital, I've been living my life on my own terms for the first time in decades. I've reconnected with old friends from my nursing days. I've joined a book club at the library. I've started taking art classes at the community center. I'm planning a trip to visit my sister in California, a trip I've been putting off for years because I was always worried about being available for David's family's needs. My heart condition is well managed with medication and lifestyle changes. I take walks in my neighborhood every morning, I cook healthy meals for myself, and I sleep better than I have in years. Turns out, the stress of constantly trying to earn my place in my own family was probably worse for my health than anything else. Do I miss David? Every single day. Do I miss Emma and Joshua? So much it physically hurts sometimes. But do I miss being treated like an inconvenient burden who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention I received? Not for 1 second. I think about that moment in the hospital room when Patricia told me I wasn't in charge anymore, and I realize she was absolutely right, but not in the way she meant. I wasn't in charge of my own life because I had handed that power over to people who didn't value me. I had spent 30 years letting other people's opinions of me matter more than my own opinion of myself. Now I'm in charge again. I wake up in my own bed, in my own house, surrounded by 40 years of memories and possessions that tell the story of a life well lived. I make my own decisions about my time, my money, my energy, and my love. I choose who gets access to me and on what terms. And you know what? Harold was right about that revealing moment when you stop being useful to people. David hasn't called in 2 weeks. Patricia hasn't called at all. They were never fighting for me. They were fighting for control over me. Now that I've taken that control back, they've moved on to other concerns. But Emma has called 3 more times. Joshua sent me a text message last week that said, "I miss you, Grandma. Mom says you need space, but I just wanted you to know I'm thinking about you. These children love me for who I am, not for what I can do for them. They're worth fighting for, even if it means fighting their parents." I've been in touch with a lawyer who specializes in grandparents' rights. Depending on how this plays out, I may pursue legal visitation if Patricia tries to completely cut off my access to the children. I have documentation of 30 years of being an involved, loving grandmother, and I have Emma's phone calls as evidence that the children want to maintain our relationship. The house that Patricia was so eager to sell to fund my institutionalization? I've had it appraised, and it's actually worth more than I thought, nearly $500,000. The retirement accounts and investments that she wanted David to control, they've been growing steadily, and with proper management, they should provide for Emma and Joshua's educations, and then some. Most importantly, I've added a codicil to my will that specifically states that if David and Patricia attempt to contest the estate or prevent my relationship with my grandchildren, the trust funds will be managed by an independent financial institution instead of Harold, ensuring that no family dynamics can interfere with Emma and Joshua's inheritances. Sometimes I wonder if I should have stood up to Patricia years ago, If I should have forced these confrontations when David was younger and might have been more likely to support me. But I think the truth is that David made his choice a long time ago, and I just refused to see it. He chose a wife who demanded that he pick sides, and he picked her. Everything that happened after that was just the slow-motion collapse of a relationship that had already ended. I don't regret the money I gave them over the years. That money bought me something valuable. It bought me clarity. It showed me exactly who I was dealing with and exactly how they saw me. Without that pattern of financial manipulation, I might never have fully understood the dynamic I was trapped in. What I do regret is all the energy I spent trying to win Patricia's approval, all the times I swallowed my hurt feelings to keep the peace, all the moments with Emma and Joshua that I didn't fully enjoy because I was worried about stepping on their mother's invisible rules. But I'm done with regrets. I'm 73 years old, I'm in relatively good health, and according to Dr. Reyes, I have many good years ahead of me. I'm going to spend those years surrounded by people who actually want me around, doing things that bring me joy and making decisions based on my own values rather than other people's convenience. If David ever decides he wants a real relationship with his mother, one based on mutual respect rather than Patricia's permission, my door is open. If Emma and Joshua want their grandmother in their lives when they're old enough to make that choice themselves, I'll be here. If Patricia wants to apologize for 30 years of systematic cruelty disguised as family management, I'll listen, though I'm not holding my breath. But I'm not waiting for any of those things to happen. I'm not putting my life on hold, hoping for people to become who I need them to be. I'm living my life for me, finally. To everyone watching this who sees themselves in my story, you deserve better than being tolerated by people who are supposed to love you. You deserve more than being valued only for what you can provide. You deserve to be seen, heard, respected, and cherished for who you are, not manipulated and managed for who others think you should be. Don't wait until you're 73 to figure out what I learned in that hospital room. You are worth fighting for. Your dignity matters. Your feelings are valid. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop accepting unacceptable treatment from people who take your love for granted. I spent 30 years being small so other people could feel big. I spent 3 decades apologizing for having needs, wants, and opinions. I spent years funding a lifestyle for people who saw me as an inconvenience. Never again. Now, if you're enjoying this story and you can relate to what I've been through, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is share our stories and realize we're not alone in these experiences. And if you want to hear more stories about finding your voice and standing up for yourself, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. But more importantly, if you're living through something similar right now, I want you to know that it's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to demand the respect you deserve. And it's never too late to discover that being alone is infinitely better than being lonely in the company of people who don't truly see you. That folder I handed to my lawyer in room 247 wasn't just about money or legal documents. It was about reclaiming my power, my dignity, and my right to be treated like a human being rather than a problem to be solved. And let me tell you something, it felt absolutely magnificent.